Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Wreck and Roll. Today, we're going to try a new segment where we kind of do a deep dive into some of the lore, the background, the history behind some of the characters, and maybe some of the other things that might be featured on the battle cards and things like that. So today, we're going to begin by taking a look at Darkwing and Dreadwind. So this was the very last combiner from Set 2 that has been revealed by Wizards of the Coast. If you've been paying attention to any of the podcasts or interviews that Drew has been on, he did mention that one of the combiners was not what we would think of as being a traditional combiner. So a lot of people either had it pegged to being these two characters who combine into a giant super jet form, or possibly being one of the duocons. In this case, probably would have been Battle Trap, because there probably would have been art assets for his top mode and his bottom mode. And I'll be honest, I was rooting a little bit more for Battle Trap because I wanted to hopefully maybe get some more helicopter characters in there to maybe get some helicopter battle card support for my boy Springer. And it also would help that he also is a truck down bottom. But I'm also really happy to get Darkwing and Dreadwind as well. If you've not gotten either of these two figures, by the way, they are probably some of the coolest and most fun Transformers put out in 2018. They should both still be pretty easy to get your hands onto. I highly recommend them. They're the duocons, so the G1 versions were just, a tank that would kind of transform into basically the pants of the robot, and then there was a jet that was basically the shirt of the robot. I believe the updated name for this guy here is Skytread. I think he was Flywheels originally, but don't quote me on that one. And then over here, I want to say that it's Battle Slash and then something Trap down bottom here. Road Trap maybe, which becomes Battle Trap together. Now, this guy, helicopter top, truck pants down here. This guy is simply just, like two pieces form one robot. This guy, the helicopter, forms a robot. The truck forms a robot. And then they can combine to a larger robot. They're both deluxe size. They are both really cool. I highly recommend them. But anyway, I was still really pumped up to see that we are getting both Darkwing and Dreadwind in this set. I do have a soft spot for both characters, and we're going to go with this as our first subject for this kind of, Files of Teletraan-I deep dive into some of the fluff behind the characters, only because a lot of people probably have no idea who these two characters are unless you were a pretty big fan of the Marvel comic book series way back in the day. So first of all, should probably note that it is very easy to get these two guys mixed up because their names are similar. So Darkwing is this guy over here. He generally has the darker color scheme over here, and this is Dreadwind over on the side. I always thought they were neat because, one, they do both kind of have the very traditional Decepticon colors of, like, a deeper blue, more of a teal blue. You've got some purple on both. And they also have that kind of off-white that some of the Decepticons tend to have. Think Starscream, guys like that. They also have some pretty cool head sculpts. So I always thought that Darkwing reminded me a little bit of like a Batman helmet type of situation. And then Dreadwind also has a pretty unique like mouth plate type of thing as well. Always has yellow eyes too, which always is cool because usually you have either blue for Autobot or red for Decepticons. Yellow eyes are a little bit more infrequent. So the name over here for Darkwing, I will probably mix those up because it's easy to say Dreadwind, Dreadwing, kind of keep going back and forth. So for Darkwing, his name was probably changed to Blackwing. If I had to guess, due to like trademark or copyright conflicts with Darkwing Duck would be my guess if I had to take a guess. These two guys are both pretty neat. We'll get more into this a little bit later, but what I like about them is that they are basically two Decepticon thug mercenary type guys who are both pretty like grumpy and grouchy and have a negative, pessimistic outlook on life, but they kind of feature in fun types of ways in that Marvel comic. Let's kind of dig a little bit deeper into both of these guys. So These are their original G1 toys in robot mode. Most of the toy images that I'll be using are from tfu.info, which I will link to in the video description. It's a cool place to go to feel nostalgic about toys that you had as a kid, or toys that you wish that you had back when you were a kid that you only got to see in the catalogs or whatever it might be. So, for Decepticon figures, they look pretty cool. They do have some pretty decent articulation. You've got some knee hinges, elbow hinges, more than probably your typical Transformer, right? Who usually just their arm will rotate at the shoulder, and that's about it. So here, this is the jet mode for Darkwing and the jet mode for Dreadwind. You guys can see the Power Master plug up on top. We'll talk more about that pretty soon. And they had the ability to combine forms into their combined form, which is Dreadwing, which is the super jet. I mean, not really that incredible. Basically, you're just kind of folding them both in half and then jamming them together, but still a neat little play feature. So at this point in the Transformers toy line, gimmicks kind of dominated each year's different release. So the 84, the 85 toys, they were both repurposed figures based upon toy lines from Japan called either Diaclone or Microman, depending on which figures. Most of the vehicles, I believe, were Diaclone. Most of the, Soundwave being a tape deck or Megatron being a gun, I believe that they came from Microman. So when you got to 86, and then maybe some of the figures in 85, I think probably maybe Devastator, but don't quote me, they may have been some of the first dedicated, brand new designed Transformers toys. But 86, at that point, I believe for the most part, you had toys that began life as Transformers. And the 86 toy line was very much focused on, the movie characters, which brought in kind of more futuristic alt modes, which up until then they'd done simply realistic alt modes. The 87 toy line was focused on the Headmaster, Target Master gimmicks. So these two guys, Dreadwind and Darkwing, they appeared in 88. 88 had two main new gimmicks going on. Although they did also have Headmasters and Target Masters reappear. This time the figures were a little bit smaller. They called them, in Japan, they called them either Junior Headmasters or Junior Target Masters. Characters like Nightbeat, Siren for the Headmasters, or for the Target Masters, characters like Quake and Spinster. So the new gimmicks in 88 were the Pretenders, which you guys can see over here. This guy's name is Skullgrin. This guy's name is Submarauder, I believe. And then you also had, they were monsters, so they were pretty cool looking. But then you also had Autobot Pretenders, and they were just, human-looking guys in exosuits, but they were also Transformer-sized, so you had, 20, 30, 40-foot tall human people, and then what would happen is on the inside, you'd have an actual Transformer robot, although to be quite honest, most of those transformations were not really very impressive, and their vehicle modes were usually kind of a joke. They were basically just folded up robot modes with maybe a wheel or wing tacked onto it. But the other gimmick in 88 that was brand new was the Power Master gimmick. So you can kind of see over here Darkwing way off in the background. You can see up here Getaway, who's an Autobot Power Master. Over here, I believe that this is Double Dealer, which is the third of the Decepticon Power Masters. And then, of course, the highlight, the showcase Power Master is Power Master Optimus Prime, who was probably, for a lot of people, if they were starting to collect the toys at this time, probably one of the cooler figures out there. So to talk a little bit more about the Power Master gimmick, the idea is that you had a small robot like this who would transform into the engine of the Transformer. And basically all that would happen is that the legs would kind of fold up to the sides, and then you would plug it into a port that was on the actual toy. So the other feature that went along with this too is that the Power Master was kind of necessary for the transformation. So in this version of Prime, the legs here for the cab mode, to get them to swing down or swing back up, you had to press in here on the grill of the truck mode. and there's like a little tab here that you had to push in. So by having the Power Master in there, it accomplished that, or you could also just use your thumb. To be quite honest, as with Headmasters and with Target Masters, it was really easy for a kid to lose the little guy. So if you have a complete version, they tend to go for a decent amount of money these days, if you were selling or if you were buying. Just a quick little personal anecdote. This was one of my first Transformers ever, was Power Master Prime. And as a kid, I was somebody who kept my toys in immaculate condition. I never lost pieces, except I did lose the Power Master for Optimus Prime, which for years and years and years basically, I don't know, triggered my OCD, even as a child. Years later, when I was in my early 20s, when we were moving my mom to a new house, we had a pool table in the basement, and as we were taking apart the pool table, in kind of like the tubes on the inside of the pool table where the ball would travel to go to where you could retrieve it, we actually found that piece, which was pretty cool. So I still have this guy to this day, and he is now complete, which makes me happy. So these two characters, Dreadwing and Darkwind, they did not feature in the cartoon at all because the cartoon series actually ended the year before. So the G1 cartoon series in the US ended with a miniseries called Rebirth, which introduced the concept of Headmasters and Target Masters into the universe. So you can see here, these are the Autobot Headmasters, including RC, who never actually had a toy made in the original, like, OG G1 series, although prototypes were made, and they were not that impressive looking. So because of that, a lot of people probably, and by looking at some of the reactions in the comments to the Dreadwing reveal as the last combiner, they don't know who these guys are, other than they are Decepticon Jets, which is, you know, helpful to have at this point because Jet support is good. So to get into the background and understand why I have a fondness for these two characters, you have to kind of go back to the Marvel G1 series for the comic books. Probably around, I want to say the issues where the Headmasters slot into are like the late 20s, maybe the 30s, are where like the storyline kind of takes place here. You had this group of Autobots on Cybertron led by Fortress Maximus who were tired of the war. So at this point, Prime and his Autobots, and then Megatron and those Decepticons, they'd landed on Earth. They were doing stuff there, or they were possibly, you know, waiting to be reactivated. I forget the exact timeline. But Fortress Maximus, he's tired of the war, so he flees and he goes to this planet Nebulosa, which he foresees as being like this kind of peaceful way to escape the war on Cybertron. He and his Autobots go there, but they are pursued by the Decepticons, who are led by Scorponok. You see him in Scorpion mode down bottom here. And kind of like as the battle is taking place now on Nebulosa as well, which is populated by the Nebulons, who are in the comic series human-looking, but in the cartoon series they're these green-skinned, oddly like jacked up and muscular humanoids. They find that in order to get an edge in this, you know, new stage of the war, that they have to kind of combine together. So the idea is that by having two minds working together, that they're more effective than just if they were working separately. So you have Headmasters, which you see Fortress Maximus, you know, dramatically removing his head here. And then you also have the Target Masters as well. Now, eventually, towards the end of the series, Scorponok, who is binary bonded to this kind of politician on Nebulos who is named Zarek. Zarek kind of is able to figure out that, you know, this battle is very bad for his home planet. So he is able to kind of like influence Scorponok and the Decepticons enough to get them to leave the planet in pursuit of the Autobots as they're going back to Earth. So at this point, the Nebulons, their world has been torn apart by war. They are done with the Transformers. They do not want them to come back. So what happens is there's this scientist, his name is High Q, and he devises this way to kind of like seed the atmosphere with this poison that poisons their fuel to make it so that if any Transformers return, that they will kind of like slowly be deactivated and then eventually die. Once the Headmaster series is done and the Transformers series is still ongoing, this I believe is issue number 42, you've got these two characters. So you've got Darkwing in the back, you have Dreadwind up front here. They land on Nebulosa, and for some reason, we don't quite know why, they are looking for Scorponok and the Decepticons. And this here is Haikyuu. He's the scientist who kind of figured out that defense system against having Transformers come back. He says, look, we don't really know. All we can tell you is that they left. And it would be a really bad idea if you guys stayed. So, of course, these two Decepticons, they do not heed the warning. They stay, and they are deactivated and just kind of like sitting there as these dead husks, or hulks for now. And then you've got this guy who kind of jumps in. His name is Hightest. He was a scientist working under Haikyuu, and he kind of decides that he is jealous of Haikyuu and like kind of his status and his, you know, his respect that he has for devising this defense system. So he quits in protest, and he's been feeling resentment and jealousy ever since. He goes to a bar. He meets up with this random criminal whose name is Throttle, hires him to go into Haikyuu's lab, steal some technology, which allows them to become Power Masters. And the idea here is that they serve as the engines for these characters. So they're basically filtering through, like they're a battery, more or less, for the Transformers rather than having to require fuel. Now, a side effect of that is that both Hightest and Throttle and any other Power Master, they have to eat like nonstop. They have to eat insane amounts of food in order to generate this energy, which as a kid, I always thought was a pretty neat concept. So for a while, basically all that Darkwing and Dreadwind and their two Power Masters end up doing is just traveling around Nebulosa and kind of raiding restaurants and grocery stores and places like that in order to get food to power themselves up, which again is a ridiculous concept, but also a fun concept for an 80s comic book series. In fact, one of the very first moments that we see these two characters is that they kind of like, they fly in, they attack this restaurant, and then they force that restaurant to cook them 20 meals, which again, just a neat, dumb, fun concept. At this point, the Autobots were actually, if I'm not mistaken, being led by Grimlock, which does not go well for them, because Optimus had died, and he dies in a really, really ridiculous way, where he and Megatron have this contest in a video game, so they're not even like their real bodies. Megatron cheats, and in doing so, like Optimus Prime compromises his values in a way to defeat Megatron. But Optimus is so kind of, I don't know, disappointed in himself that he counts himself as the loser, and he allows himself to be destroyed, essentially in a way committing suicide. It's really ridiculous. I want to say it's issue 24, maybe 25 of the series. The early stuff was not great. But at that point, Prime's consciousness had secretly been downloaded onto a floppy disk, which at this point, Goldbug, who is the recreated body of Bumblebee, because Bumblebee was destroyed by G.I. Joe. Again, a lot of weird stuff was happening during this point in the comics. Goldbug shows up. He has a handful of other Autobots with him, and they're looking to kind of have Prime's body like recreated. And Haikyuu kind of warns them like, hey, you know, we don't really have much beef with the Autobots, but if you stay here, you're going to die. Goldbug and these Autobots, they try to stop Dreadwing. Sorry, see, messed up again. Darkwing and Dreadwind. But they're kind of weakened. They also undergo this Power Master process, although Goldbug does not. But the other three Autobots with him get away. Joyride, and I want to say Slapdash is the other guy who's that buggy on the bottom of the screen right now. They kind of get powered up. But they also, during this time, Haikyuu also creates a body for Prime. And Haikyuu himself, he decides to become Prime's Power Master. And then Haikyuu becomes important to the comic series a lot later towards the end of it. We'll get there in a little bit. So Prime shows up. He defeats Dreadwind and Darkwing. And by the end, Haikyuu, acting as a representative for, the government of Nebulosa, says, look, you guys are banished. Leave. Do not come back here. So for a while, we don't see those two guys. They don't show up. I believe about 10 issues later, around issue 52, they show up again, and they're working for this weird robot group called the Mechanibals, who are these, demented-looking Kirby-esque creatures here. And basically what they do is they eat mechanical life forms, and then they recycle what they've eaten into spare parts, which they then sell. Throttle and High Test, the Power Masters for Darkwing and Dreadwind, they are they are pretending that the jet forms of the two Transformers are their spaceship. So the Mechanibals do not know that these two organic life forms are actually bonded with Transformers. They're keeping that secret. The Mechanibals are paying them to go out, find mechanical life forms, come back to provide them essentially with food and then stuff to sell. Along the way, they end up finding these two guys who are Autobot pretenders. I want to say that this is Cloudburst, but do not quote me. I think that this is Landmine, but again, do not quote me. Again, even though they look human, they are Transformer sized, which is really weird. They're being followed by Throttle and by High Test. They find out these are secretly Autobots. The robot forms are inside of these shells here. They bring them to the Mechanibals, but they escape. These two Autobots escape the Mechanibals. Along the way, the two Autobots crash land. Things get weird again here on this planet that is basically populated by these female Amazonian Wonder Woman-esque warrior women tribes, where the men essentially act as servants, and the men are all dopey and dumb and malformed looking. When they crash land, they are brought to the queen of this group. Again, these warrior women would be Transformer sized. They are giants. And again, they have no respect whatsoever for males. So what they end up doing is they force them into all of these trials by combat, which, because these two are Transformers, they survive and they do well, at which point the queen essentially is attracted to one of them, which leads to all of these really awkward moments in the comic where she is trying to seduce him, and then he's awkwardly trying to push her away because he is a robot and it would not be compatible. At which point he reveals, hey, I'm a robot, sorry, this is not going to work. At which point she decapitates him, but don't worry, it gets better later, he is repaired. The storyline somehow ends with Skylynx showing up. He captures the two Decepticons. They end up going back to the Mechanibals to kind of pay off a debt. At this point, as they're about to leave, Skylynx and or maybe Cloudburst and Landmine say, oh, P.S., those two guys that you thought were human, they're actually bonded to Decepticons. Just so that you know, at which point the Mechanibals start to chase down the two Decepticons. And then for a long time, we don't see these two guys for a while. We see them again later. Megatron at this point had also died, but gets better. Megatron hires these two. He hires them to basically go find the body of Starscream, which was floating above Earth because, I want to say around issue 50-ish, maybe, Starscream kind of gets super powered up and basically kills off most of the 84, 85 cast, because at that point there were no toys being made of them anymore, and Hasbro basically wanted the comic book to focus on characters that had toys. So they kill off a whole bunch of them to make room for new characters. Megatron hires them to bring back Starscream's body, because there was a new Starscream toy that was being put out, which was a Pretender, by the way. At which point Megatron is impressed by how they do, so he says, hey, look, why don't you guys kind of stay around? At the time, Scorponok was leading the Decepticons. Megatron had like secretly come back, and he was kind of building up his own army again, which at this point I think only consisted of maybe, I want to say, a group of Micromasters, so it wasn't very formidable yet. Dreadwind, Darkwing say, hey, look, we're still being chased by these mechanable guys, so yeah, that beats living on the run. And obviously, Mechanables had found their way to Cybertron, and I don't think we see these guys again, but don't quote me on that. Yeah, like this is, they are inside this fortress right here, and then they are, you know, less than half a mile away, eating some poor random Decepticon here. We don't see these guys for a while until towards the end of the comic series. This was where the big, you know, like Unicron shows up in the comics, which goes very differently than what happens in the movie. So I do recommend maybe checking out whenever Simon Furman, who is the new writer, comes onto the series. Like things kind of get pretty good in Marvel at that point. So at this point, Unicron is on his way to Cybertron. So Unicron in this Marvel series is kind of like this dark god, basically. And then the counterpoint is Primus, who is the creator of the Transformers. Primus basically teleports all Transformers to Cybertron. And that does include Dreadwind and Darkwing here. Now, I didn't maybe mention their personalities before, because they didn't quite feature heavily personality-wise at this point, but Simon Furman does a better job of giving everybody like little quirks and, you know, personality traits. So they're both really grumpy and really grouchy, but Dreadwind does it in a very passive-aggressive and mopey type of way. Like if it weren't for Darkwing, Dreadwind would probably just sit in a corner complaining about stuff. Darkwing also is very pessimistic and grouchy and grumpy and hates everything, but he does it in a much more active way. Like his basic way of thinking is that life sucks, life is terrible, so I'm going to go out and make life suck and make life terrible for everybody else too. And he basically drags Dreadwind out there along the way to do that with him. Side note, I always liked these type of splash pages in the original comic book series, just because you have a whole bunch of characters at once, which is kind of cool. You know, people in the Facebook group, here's our boy Cup, who also is a pretty big character in the comic series. We get some random characters over here. So at the time, like I mentioned, Scorponok had led the Decepticons. Starscream and Shockwave had some plans to kind of take over. Those did not quite come to fruition yet. Bludgeon back here will also be important pretty soon, so just to kind of point him out. Bludgeon, Octopunch, and Stranglehold, and also Fangry, they're all... Nope, my bad, Fangry is not a pretender, he's a headmaster. But these three guys here, they're pretenders, so there are robot forms on the inside. Whoops, I did not mean to do that. Whoops. Okay, there we go, that fixed it. So from here, summoned back for this big battle against Unicron. Unicron shows up, which is a really cool issue. Issue 75, if I'm not mistaken. So during the battle, Prime and Scorponok, they kind of have this loose alliance between Autobots and Decepticons. They're out there, they're leading this battle. They're kind of trying to inspire their troops because you have this giant, you know, evil Transformer tearing the planet apart. At this point, you see them kind of jump into battle, and this is a pretty good kind of summary of both of their viewpoints on life. You know, Dreadwing wants to go make Unicron's life miserable. Darkwing wants to go make his life miserable, and Dreadwind says, "Yeah, we're gonna die anyway. Why not? Let's go for it." Although they do survive, which is kind of neat. So you see here, you know, Dreadwind actually being somewhat hopeful, telling Highbrow not to go get killed, but it happens anyway. They survive the battle. After the battle, Cybertron is kind of like in this really bad shape. It's kind of have, you know, earthquakes, and it seems like the planet is tearing itself to pieces. So this is the two characters running to this kind of, you know, first meeting of this Autobot Decepticon Council. Along the way, they have like a really cool interaction, which I think is probably the moment where solidified their personalities in my mind. You can see again like the kind of cool head designs here. So I'll let you read it. I won't read it out loud to you, but you see their personalities kind of shine through in what happens here. And then here, just a cool moment again with their kind of pessimistic, miserable outlook on life kind of going on. Autobot symbol on the building falls down, kind of crushes Dreadwind. I'll let you read it before I move on. Kind of neat too. I guess like this is a helmet piece on Dreadwind's head. So I guess he wears it, pops off when he kind of gets crushed. He's okay. He survives. It's fine. It is kind of weird that for a while we don't see Dreadwing with any... We don't see either character with their wings on their back. I don't know if they're meant to be action masters at this point, which is a possibility, or if maybe that was a possible design choice where they were going to be action masters. I don't know. Although, to be honest with you, at this point, a lot of the robot forms did not have like the vehicle form kibble on it either. So, shocking nobody, the Decepticons were not, part of this alliance in good faith, which I should probably mention. Both Prime and Scorponok die in this battle against Unicron. So Grimlock is once again leading the Autobots, although Prowl is kind of like a co-leader or trying to be like an advisor, and it's kind of just a pain in Grimlock's neck. Bludgeon takes over as leader of the Decepticons, and Grimlock, during all of these council meetings, is basically trash talking the Decepticons. He's throwing like cans at them as they're having these meetings. Grimlock goes off on his own and goes steal some spaceships because he knows that the Decepticons are going to stab him in the back, which they do. The Decepticons also, they steal all of the remaining spaceships on Cybertron, and they decide that they're going to go off and kind of conquer the galaxy. You see our two heroes down bottom, kind of eager to have this happen. Would also like to point out, like, Fangry is just a cool Transformer too. He's in that bottom left-hand corner. He's this winged Decepticon wolf who's always angry and slobbering and all that type of stuff. So Decepticons end up on this planet. I believe its name is Klo, K-L-O, and it is populated by these very like innocent-looking, I don't know, troll doll type looking humanoids, and you have all of these panel sequences where they're getting like blown apart in horrific ways, which is, I don't know, fun and morbid to watch. The Decepticons run rampant, but the Autobots, of course, go there to protect the inhabitants. The Autobots are in really bad shape because they, again, their forces were decimated by the battle against Unicron. So here you see Dreadwind and Darkwing in their combined Dreadwing form attacking Getaway. And at that point, it's kind of like, I guess they fly too close to Getaway, or they're in danger of being shot by Getaway, at which point Bludgeon kind of reprimands them for being stupid and kind of taking pointless risks. And at that point, kind of like Optimus Prime shows up. He's been recreated, and kind of like the tide of battle turns. The Decepticons flee, which eventually leads into the Generation 2 comic book series where the two characters don't really show up, if I'm not mistaken, although at some point we do have this guy show up, whose name is Dreadwing. This is a Generations 2 toy, came out towards the end of that toy line. Really kind of neat, actually. You started to see a lot more posability and articulation in them. Also had a really cool Gatling gun in his different modes. In plane mode, it's beneath him, but like you kind of twist this thing on the back here and it fires out all the missiles on top, which was pretty cool. A lot like the original toy, it had another jet which combined, like he kind of plugs into the back of the stealth bomber mode here. Just a neat toy, and this guy's also had a couple updated versions throughout the years too. It's like an open question of if he's supposed to be one of the original two recreated or not. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes the answer is no. Another fun fact is that this guy was going to be repainted into Megatron, and then this guy was going to be Starscream. So just a neat, like, we forced them to like kind of transform together and be together all the time. But that toy got canceled when the G2 line got canceled too. These two characters also did get updated toys throughout the years. This was, I believe, a BotCon exclusive toy. BotCon was the official Transformers convention. It got renamed to HasCon, I think, which kind of encompasses all the different like traditional G.I. Joe, Transformers, all that stuff together. So he is, I believe, hard to find, pretty expensive. He is a repaint and remold of the Classics Jetfire toy, which also is pretty cool. And then Darkwing was also repainted / remolded from the Classics Silverbolt toy. So these two obviously do not combine because of that reason. And this guy's actually a lot taller in toy form than this guy, but like kind of cool that they got updated versions. They also both got updated versions, I believe, last year for the Power of the Primes toy line. They're both neat toys. Again, they both have really cool updated head sculpts. They are based off of their remolds and repaints of the Combiner Wars Aerial Bot figures. So they also have the ability to become like combiner pieces. I've seen a lot of people either combine them with the Combiner Wars Starscream because they're also jets, or with the Combiner Wars Cyclonus, which I think the color scheme for that works a little bit better just because of the purple on both figures. But just, kind of neat. They also have the ability to combine into that super jet form, which again is basically like two jets kind of, you just cram them together, which cool that we get that updated. And it is really neat that we get them in the card game. It's also neat. I know it's hard to read on what we have here, but the subtitles or like the titles beneath their name here, Blackwing, which again is the updated version of Darkwing, says attacker, whereas Dreadwind says defender. So once again, you have Darkwing being that kind of more proactive type of guy. You have Dreadwind being that more passive or reactive type of guy, which I don't know if that was intentional, but it's kind of cool that that kind of plays out into the card game as well. I'm not going to kind of do a deep dive into their play style or what you might pair them with, but we will get there eventually. I'm excited that these two guys are in the game. They're commons. They'll be easy to get. So I'm sure that you guys will see Joe, Frenchie, and I using these in videos in the near future. Going to wrap things up here. We will do more of these in the future. So if you are not already part of our different online communities, I highly recommend that you do so. Definitely join our Facebook page. Anything that we do, we post about there. If you've not subscribed to our YouTube channel, do that too. This way you see our new stuff when it comes out. We also started a Patreon, which if you guys would like to contribute to, would be fantastic. We are not looking to quit our day jobs. We are, we're not going to lock anything behind a paywall. It's just you guys, if you have a couple of bucks to spare, just throw in some appreciation towards us. And that's going to go towards reimbursing Frenchie and Joe for expenses that they've made. Joe has put a lot of money into either updated equipment, cameras, and audio equipment, and then Frenchie helped us out with a new lighting setup, which definitely has improved things quite a bit compared to our old system of putting construction paper over top of the lights on Joe's chandelier to make it so that there's not too much glare. But again, we're not going to lock anything behind the paywall. It's just you guys showing appreciation. If you don't, that's okay too. I don't know, if you see us at a convention, buy us a beer. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because at this point I'm just rambling. So we're pumped up for Rise of the Combiners. We're sure you guys are too. This is Wreck and Roll. Adios.